Well, when Australia's National Cabinet was formed just over a year ago, people hailed it as the best thing to happen to Australia since sliced bread. Everything would happen quicker, be more streamlined, be more immediate and less clunky than COAG. Now, the role of COAG was to initiate, develop and monitor the implementation of policy reforms of national significance, which require cooperative action by Australian governments. But the reality now is that National Cabinet has been a classic case of be careful what you wish for. Prime Minister Scott Morrison should have taken back control months ago once he realised that certain premiers were running their own races with state elections on the horizon. The PM had the option several times during the last 12 months to bring Western Australia into line. Like dealing with a petulant child, you do not give in. Instead, for the last 12 months, it has been many Labor tails wagging the dog. It's been one charade after another. Western Australia has been allowed to become an island within an island. The hard border has perpetuated several myths that have become accepted truths in that state, including that WA is the economic backbone and powerhouse of the Australian economy. And without the hard border, the rest of Australia would not be experiencing the economic windfalls. WA does not need the eastern states for any reason. And West Australians are always free to leave Western Australia at any time they want. In reality, WA's geographical location always meant it would never be as affected as elsewhere, and small business, hospitality and tourism operators are going to the wall. We've seen the Labor premiers of Queensland and Western Australia rewrite the COVID rulebook to their advantage, instilling fear and control into Australians who've just thrown up their hands and thought that their government will save them. Scott Morrison has given a free pass for National Cabinet to be able to be blamed for everything from the vaccine rollout to any other criticism. It's now time for the Prime Minister to remember the National in National Cabinet, pull rank and turn this ship around before the lunatics start running the asylum. Well, Emily, I'd love to bring you in. Welcome to the In My View panel. I hope you're having a lovely time tonight. What is your view regarding National Cabinet?
Thank you. Yes, I agree with you in that Western Australia has really gotten out of hand with their policies. And a lot of states have gotten out of hand with their policies during this time with COVID. And I think probably the most dangerous thing about that are the hard border restrictions. Federalism and this idea that we can have different states that have their own policies only really works when people can essentially vote with their feet and they can move out of that state. When that's not happening, we have a problem. I think Australians in whatever state should have the chance to be able to move out. And I think that we should have more separate states with more separate laws that allow for people to make those choices and choose what kind of environment they want to be in. But there becomes a serious problem when they're trapped and essentially in a jail set up by their premier.
Yeah, definitely. And look, as I said, coming from the state of Western Australia, I can say that there was ample opportunity for Scott Morrison to bring Mark McGowan into line when the rest of the nation agreed to relax their border restrictions to come in line for Christmas. And then who can forget when our Premier refused to actually travel for National Cabinet in person for fear of catching COVID-19 from the South Australian Premier. I used the line earlier, like dealing with a petulant child. All Morrison had to say is, listen, Mark, we've had enough of this. You want the federal money for your job seeker and job keeper payments for your residents in Western Australia? You come over here. If it's good enough for everyone, we do it that way. Anyway, Kai, should bring you in as well. What are your views?
Well, look, if there's anything that I've observed from the way that COVID has transpired over the last 12 months, it's that state politics has just become such a dominant priority for all of the state premiers. I think that the sense of national unity and the need for a coordinated national approach, a lot of that just has gone out the window when premiers have realised how much political hay they can make by basically showing how tough they are when it comes to hardening up their borders against people coming from other states. They're really, in a way, kowtowing, I think, to an almost, I'm not sure if xenophobic is the right word, but, a real, hey, our state, we are the gold class, we are the premier, we are the premier example of how you should be dealing with this. And all these other premiers, well, thank goodness you're not in their state. So I think that's been very disappointing behaviour by a lot of the different state premiers, especially when some of them basically haven't been able to turn out a particularly good result, even if it's not necessarily their fault. And I think that's what happens when you roll the political dice like that to try to make hay from your particular COVID measures. And then, of course, anything can happen, as Victoria has found out.
Yes, and Ryan, your views as well tonight.
Well, first of all, I think the National Cabinet is just a bit of marketing spin, something you'd come to expect from Scott Morrison. It's just coag by another name. It doesn't seem to have had any real effect on how Commonwealth-state relations in Australia have changed. But I do think that states during COVID, Western Australia in particular, have done what they think is important for the people who live within them. And Mark McGowan has proven that not only is his approach popular, the biggest electoral victory that an Australian jurisdiction has really seen ever, but the numbers stack up on his side. There are more jobs in Western Australia now than there were before the pandemic. The economy is booming. People are out and free and doing what they want. And that's all because of the hard decisions that he had to take to make sure that they got to protect the environment that they'd created that was COVID-free. I don't think you can criticise Mark McGowan for that. I think
I've got to disagree with you, Ryan,
Sure.
because I've lived there full time. This is a myth that has been perpetuated. West Australians are, yes, they're free to leave Western Australia. I can find you dozens of examples of people that have had their good to go passes rejected to go back to their state. Mental health has been completely ignored. It's a one-party state media in Western Australia. And as for the resource sector, the mining companies, they make their own rules anyway. They can breath test people into sites. They would always say who was allowed and who wasn't. This has been used to a political advantage. As you say, it's worked well for Labor. It hasn't worked well. And I tell you what, yes, there are a majority of Australians, naturally, the Labor government was returned. But, small business operators, tourism operators, their voices are not heard because it is a one-party state media there.
In Western Australia now, I've got in-laws living in Perth. You can't get a holiday booking at a holiday rental because it's booked out so far in advance. There is so much domestic activity going on in their economy that simply you can't get a booking at a hotel, you can't get a holiday rental because there's so much money in their local economy, money that's not being spent elsewhere, and that they've got the freedom to go out, go to the footy, they can go to a show, they can go to a whole range of other different places because of the security that the decisions of the West Australian government has brought to them. And it's a similar picture in other parts of the country as well. Queensland, for example, similar result electorally, adopting a very similar set of policies. So what I don't understand here is why we're criticising state leaders for looking after the people who elect them and re-elect them convincingly, that have kept them safe amidst the worst global pandemic that we've seen in a century. And I think the voters are speaking for themselves and delivering support to governments that look after them.
Ryan, if there's no COVID in Western Australia like we were told and there was no COVID community transmission for 10 months, why were the restrictions necessary? Why was
because
the AFL...
there was COVID community transmission in other parts of the country and they didn't want to ruin what they had.
It is ridiculous.
Simple.
And let me just tell you, we had a 5-day lockdown 4 weeks before the state election. The person has never come forward. They had 3 flatmates, a fiancé. They went all around Western Australia. Very, very convenient for a 5-day lockdown. May I also just say, you cannot keep locking up a state with a roller door border approach for one COVID case. We are never going to eradicate
locked up our country.
COVID.
International visitors can't get into Australia. Why is it okay?
Section 92 of the Australian Constitution said there should be free travel and trade between the states.
And the High Court has ruled that Mark McGowan's border closures are constitutional and legal.
Well,
so I don't think we've got a leg to stand on with that.
There's another thing to that. And as I said, we live in a one-party state in Western Australia and it's not good. And you're only hearing one side of it.